Welcome, traveler. You're about to enter a story older than time. The rise and fall of the Titans, the first gods. Listen closely, for their echoes still shape the world beneath your feet. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the flame of myth alive. Now, let the story begin. Let the winds of myth carry you gently through the mists of time. Close your eyes and listen. In the beginning, there was no sun, no moon, no breath of wind, nor whisper of water. Only a silence so vast it rang louder than thunder. A void without time, without shape. From that silence came chaos. Chaos was not a being, not truly, more an unshaped breath of potential. It stretched infinitely, a formless fog that hung in a womb of possibility. And then, like a dream beginning to take form, she appeared. Gaia, the earth. Not born of anyone, not fashioned by hand or thought. Gaia came into being as the foundation beneath all else. Her body was stone and soil, meadow and mountain, yet her spirit was warmth, calm and slow and nurturing. And soon after her arrival, others emerged from the unseen folds of chaos. Tartarus, the deep abyss that mirrored Gaia in depth and shadow. Eros, the pulse of desire that would set the stars spinning. Nyx, the velvet night, and Erebus, the gloom between worlds. But it was Uranus, the sky, who stirred Gaia's heart. He unfolded above her, endless and star-studded, a luminous dome that blanketed her surface. Where he touched her, life began. Together, they bore the Titans, 12 radiant beings who walked between sky and soil, enormous in form and even greater in presence. Oceanus, the ever-flowing boundary of the world's waters. Coeus, keeper of celestial intelligence. Creus, the constellation wielder. Hyperion, lord of the radiant light. Iapetus, bearer of mortal suffering. Cronus, the youngest, quiet, calculating, and destined. And with them came their sisters. Thea, the shining one, mother of sight and light. Rhea, the queen of wild flow. Themis, embodiment of divine order. Mnemosyne, the soul of memory. Phoebe, radiant prophecy. Tethys, who held the first seas in her embrace. These were the first gods, though godhood then was not what it would later become. The Titans were not omniscient, but they were close to the pulse of the universe. They understood its rhythms because they were born of its first breath. In those ancient days, Gaia and Uranus ruled together, but Uranus grew afraid. He looked upon his children, tall as mountains, eyes full of worlds, and saw not beauty, but threat. So he pushed new children back into Gaia's womb, monstrous, many-armed beings like the Hecatonchires and one-eyed Cyclopes. Gaia groaned in agony, heavy with unbirthed power, and her pain became fury. She turned to her children, her Titans, and whispered a plan. Only Cronus, the youngest, listened with cold resolve. He took the sickle Gaia forged from the bones of the earth, a blade not of steel, but of inevitability, and waited until Uranus lay across the heavens. And as the stars blinked in innocent wonder, Cronus struck. With one swing, sky and earth were divided forever. Uranus screamed, a sound like galaxies shattering, and fell back. From his blood, splashing upon Gaia's skin, came the Furies, the Giants, and Aphrodite, born of sea foam and sorrow. Cronus had overthrown the heavens, but in his victory, a curse hung in the air. Uranus, still retreating into the veil of stars, spoke. "You too shall be undone, by your own blood." Cronus did not speak, but in the stillness of that new world, the primordial veil had lifted and destiny stirred awake. In the wake of the severed sky, the world lay bare, raw and trembling, like the skin beneath a torn veil. And from that wound in eternity came a silence unlike any before. Not the silence of emptiness, but of anticipation, a hush before the breath, before the turning of a new age. Cronus, the youngest son of Gaia and Uranus, stood alone amid the echoes of creation. The sky no longer pressed down upon the earth. The ancient dominion of Uranus had been torn away, leaving behind a cosmos still wet with its own birth. And in the cold quiet that followed the act of cosmic rebellion, Cronus stood crowned not with ceremony, but with consequence. He had risen not through fate, but by blade, with the sickle forged by Gaia from the blackened bones of the earth. He had taken his father's place and sundered the heavens from the soil. And now, in the void that trembled with new potential, he declared himself king, not only of his kin, but of time itself. Cronus, the god of ages, became the ruler of a world still dripping with mythic dew. The Titans rule. He built no palace, no tower or throne. His seat of power was Mount Othrys, a shadowy titan of a mountain shrouded in grey mist, where the air was thick with the breath of the earth herself. There, the Titans gathered, 12 siblings born of Gaia and Uranus, radiant and immense, each embodying an element of the cosmos. They did not squabble or seek war. For a time, there was harmony. Cronus ruled not with cruelty, but with stillness, a cautious kind of order that spread like glass over water. Under his reign, the earth flourished. Trees rose high without falling. Animals roamed without fear. Rivers ran as veins through the green and gold skin of the world. There were no weapons, for there were no enemies. No birth of death. No knowledge of want. The sky was wide and blue, the stars scattered with gentle intention. The winds moved slowly, and time passed like the drifting of petals upon a pond. This was the Golden Age, a time before mankind, before fire, before war. The creatures that roamed the earth, nymphs, dryads, and dreamlike spirits, lived in communion with the land. They whispered through trees, laughed in the spray of waterfalls, and sang to the moonless sky. It was a dream that never changed. But time, even ruled by Cronus, could not be held still forever. The dread of prophecy. There was a murmur that lived in the shadows, a rustle in the leaves, a glint in the still waters. A prophecy. The voice of Uranus had not died with his dominion. As Cronus looked up into the deep indigo sky each night, he heard it, not with ears, but in his bones. You too shall be overthrown by your own son. It was not a warning. It was a sentence. The prophecy sank its roots deep into Cronus's mind. It grew there, twisting through his thoughts like ivy through old stone. Though the world outside shimmered with light and peace, Cronus's inner world dimmed. His dreams darkened. His breath slowed. The Titan who had defied the stars now feared the future. He took Rhea, his sister, as his queen. She was wild and moon-soft, with eyes like rivers at dusk. Her laughter once calmed him, and her touch once softened his edges. But as she began to bear children, his fear sharpened. First came Hestia, flickering and warm, goddess of the hearth and flame. Then Demeter, rich and fertile, with soil in her breath and golden grain in her wake. Then Hera, poised and distant, already bearing the weight of destiny in her gaze. Then Hades, silent and watchful, with a chill of deep stone in his voice. Then Poseidon, born amidst crashing waves and the roar of tides. Each time, Cronus did the unthinkable. As Rhea wept and pleaded, Cronus swallowed each newborn whole, not with rage, but with a kind of quiet, agonizing resolve. He was not a cruel god. He was a frightened one. He feared becoming his father, and in his fear, he became something worse. A keeper of stillness, a hoarder of time, a jailer of possibility. Within his vast body, his children lived, not dead, but suspended, dreaming in darkness, their divine sparks flickering like distant stars trapped behind heavy clouds. Rhea, once gentle and yielding, grew brittle. Her love for Cronus, once deep as the sea, now became a quiet tide of grief. And then came her sixth child, the birth of Zeus. It was a night heavy with rain, lightning curling like veins across the sky. In secret, far from the gaze of Cronus, Rhea gave birth to Zeus, a child wrapped in thunder and fire. She did not weep this time. Instead, she wrapped a stone in soft cloth, molding it to the shape of an infant, and offered it to Cronus with hands that no longer trembled. He swallowed it whole and said nothing. He believed the curse was broken, but far away, hidden in the caverns of Mount Ida, Zeus was cradled by the earth herself. His nursemaid was Amalthea, a celestial she-goat who fed him with milk as rich as moonlight. And around him danced the Corets, armored spirits who clashed their blades in rhythm to hide his cries from the listening wind. Zeus grew not with hatred, but with a deep, growing knowledge, a fire that began as warmth and would one day become lightning, the stillness before the storm. And so the years passed. Cronus sat upon his throne of shadow, unaware that his fate had slipped through his fingers like smoke. Rhea walked beside him, silent and waiting. The Titans continued their watch over the world, but something beneath the soil had begun to stir. The Cyclops and Hecatonchires, monstrous and ancient children of Gaia, still writhed in Tartarus, buried by Cronus, hidden from the stars. Their cries pulsed through the veins of the earth. Gaia listened and remembered. Zeus, now grown, stood at the edge of time, gazing toward the mountain where his father ruled. The world around him held its breath, for the Golden Age was not a time of peace, but of pause, a calm before the unraveling. The wind shifted, the sky darkened, and from the east came the whisper of rebellion. Soft as a promise, sharp as a storm. Deep beneath the skin of the earth, things were beginning to stir, not loudly, not yet, but like the creak of old trees in a windless forest. The kind of stirring that makes animals pause mid-step. The kind that even gods feel in their bones. Though the world above remained cloaked in peace, something below had begun to remember pain. Gaia, the eternal earth, bore all things, joy and sorrow, beauty and betrayal, and nothing was ever truly lost in her memory. Beneath the golden calm of Cronus's reign, she could still feel her buried children pressing against her stone womb heart. The Cyclops, each with a single burning eye, and the Hecatonchires, creatures of 100 arms and unfathomable might, had been sealed away long ago. Not for evil, but because Cronus, like his father before him, had feared their power. He had locked them in Tartarus, the deepest pit, darker than night and heavier than time. Their cries did not echo. They were absorbed, muffled by stone and time. But Gaia heard, and slowly she began to whisper. Whispers in the roots, The whispers came not as words, but as dreams. They drifted through the roots of ancient trees. They hummed in the stillness of moonlit caves. They rose from cracks in mountains and coiled like fog around sleeping spirits. One by one, they found their way to the ears of a young god, a boy who had grown tall under the watch of shadows, suckled by starlight and suckled by fate. Zeus, the child whom Cronus believed devoured, now stood upon the slopes of Mount Ida. His gaze turned toward the east, toward Mount Othrys, where the Titans still ruled. He did not yet wear lightning in his hands, nor thunder upon his brow, but there was something gathering inside him, a pressure, a knowing, a pulse that did not belong to any god who had come before. And Gaia saw it. She saw him. She sent signs through silence. Rhea came to him one evening, cloaked in dusk and sorrow, and told him everything. How her children had been swallowed, how her heart had been split into 5 pieces and buried within Cronus's hollow body. Zeus did not rage. He listened. And then he climbed the peaks of Crete, where clouds kissed the stone, and he placed his hand to the sky. The plan of the earth. The earth does not move quickly. She plots not in days or seasons, but in eras. Gaia had waited long, through the tyranny of Uranus, through the frozen reign of Cronus. Now, she began to breathe anew. At her urging, Zeus descended into the belly of the earth and found there a sacred herb, bitter and silver green. With the guidance of Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, who moved like a shadow behind the minds of gods, he brewed a potion of unbinding. A draught not meant to kill, but to release. Zeus climbed alone to Mount Othrys, cloaked as a wandering cupbearer. Cronus, suspicious of none but his own children, drank deeply. And then the world turned. One by one, the swallowed gods returned. First Hestia, radiant and pure. Then Demeter, her skin the color of sunlit wheat. Then Hera, fierce and proud. Then Hades, dark-eyed and composed. Then Poseidon, who shook the floor with every breath. Each of them rose from Cronus's body as if from sleep, restored and gleaming with fury and purpose. They had not aged, they had waited. Together they looked upon Zeus, the brother they had never seen and yet somehow knew. He stood calm at the center of them, not larger than life, but measured like a storm on the horizon, the division of allegiance. The Titans felt the tremor in the cosmos. Cronus called a council beneath Mount Othrys, and 12 thrones were summoned from the mountain's heartstone. Some Titans, Themis, Titaness of divine law, and Prometheus, son of Iapetus, saw the coming storm and did not turn away. They understood that time must move forward, that stasis is a kind of death. They leaned toward the future. Others, Atlas, massive and proud, Menoetius, fierce with fire, and even Hyperion, Lord of Light, refused to yield. They clung to the old reign, unwilling to see their dominion shattered by a new order. The skies darkened, the wind no longer carried birdsong, the earth grew heavy, and somewhere, beyond the edges of the visible world, the iron gates of Tartarus trembled on their hinges. The storm approaches. Zeus raised his hand to the sky. The first bolt of lightning struck the summit of Mount Othrys, not in fury, but in promise. It cracked stone. It lit fire in the clouds. It spoke the language of war. But this was not a war of mortals. This would be a war of gods, a titanomachy, a clash so vast it would unmake mountains and give birth to seas. And it had begun. not with blood, but with rebellion. A rebellion that had waited through generations. A rebellion foretold. A rebellion born not of hate, but of rhythm, the great turning of divine seasons. And so the seeds of rebellion took root, beneath the earth, behind the stars, between each breath of the wind. The Titans had ruled an age of gold, but gold, when held too tightly, becomes brittle. And now, the cracks had begun to show. The Titan world was no longer at rest. Beneath Mount Ida, in the stillness between storm and silence, Zeus stood, listening, not to voices, but to vibration, to energy, to the language that slept within clouds, within stone, within the blood of the world itself. He was not yet king, not yet the wielder of lightning or the breaker of rains, but he had begun to remember something ancient, not from his own life, but from the bones of existence. There was a storm, and it was not coming. It was inside him, the awakening of the sky. When Cronus severed Uranus from Gaia, he split sky from earth. The two had once been one, conjoined lovers, eternal and whole, but the sickle had divided them, and in that wound Zeus now stood. He was not merely the son of Cronus. He was the son of the cleft between above and below, a child of distance, of space, of division. As he reached toward the heavens, lightning did not strike him. It gathered to him as if recognizing its shepherd. From the swirling tempests over Mount Ida came his first weapon, a thunderbolt born not of metal but of pure will, forged in the endless furnace of sky. It did not burn his hand, it became an extension of it. The Cyclopes, once locked in Tartarus by Cronus, were now freed by Gaia's deep command. Grateful, they gave to Zeus 3 sacred gifts: the thunderbolt, to strike down tyranny and bring light to dark skies; the Aegis, a shield not of bronze, but of fear itself, a thing that whispered dread to all who faced it; and the crown of storm, invisible but ever above his brow, marking him as the breaker of stillness. With these, Zeus did not become cruel. He became necessary, the gathering of the gods. Far and wide, the freed children of Rhea began to rally. Poseidon, sea-born and restless, learned the songs of ocean trenches, wielding tridents carved from coral older than memory. Hades, silent and brooding, found his strength in shadows, slipping through worlds as if space bent around his steps. Hera, noble and thunder-eyed, did not seek war, but would not be denied justice. Demeter, whose touch brought green from barren rock, began to stir life in places where only ash remained. And Hestia, eternal flame, held the first spark of unity at the center of them all. But war was not a thing they had ever known. Not truly, not yet. So Metis, Titaness of deep counsel, taught them how to think like flame, unpredictable, rising, consuming. And Prometheus, the foresighted one, shared what he could not yet give to mortals: the knowledge of creation, of strategy, of fire with purpose. They did not yet call themselves Olympians, but they had become a different kind of divine. Othrys shakes. Cronus, high upon Mount Othrys, felt it. A trembling, first subtle, then unmistakable. The stars shifted, the winds became erratic. The golden stillness he had forged now cracked at the edges, like porcelain held too tightly. He summoned his allies. Atlas, tall as twilight, stood ready, arms like the trunks of celestial trees. Menoetius, who burned with fury and pride, thirsted for combat. Creus and Iapetus, veterans of the old celestial order, returned to the call of their blood. Even Hyperion, the Lightbringer, turned his face to the dawn of battle with sorrow. And yet, among them, there was unease, for none had seen what Zeus had become. Cronus looked toward the east, toward the rumbling, growing power, and in his heart, that same heart that once beat with rebellion, he felt something alien, fear, the birth of war. It began with a single bolt. Zeus cast it across the sky, not as attack, but as declaration. It split cloud from cloud, sky from sky, as if tearing open the veil between peace and purpose. The air lit with fire. Mountains groaned. Oceans reared. Even the stars leaned in. This was not just rebellion. It was the turning of an age. The Titans stepped forward, eternal and vast. The new gods rose to meet them, not in hatred, but in balance. For the cosmos must move. What followed would be a war that spanned 10 immortal years. A war of element and essence, of thunder against stone, of prophecy against pride. But that tale, that titanomachy, was still forming in the mists of destiny. Now, the storm had only just been born. And so, the sky remembered what it was to fall. The air grew sharp. The world stood still. And in the silence before the clash, one truth pulsed through every corner of existence. The age of Titans was ending, and the age of thunder had begun. The first thunderclap. It came not with fanfare, but with pressure. A density in the air, a weight in the marrow of all things living or divine. Zeus stood upon a jagged peak, framed by clouds bruised with storm. He raised his hand. In it, the first bolt, not of lightning alone, but of fate itself, crackled with light that pulsed in ancient tongues. He did not hurl it in rage. He sent it like a message. It arced across the heavens and struck the crown of Mount Othrys, the seat of the Titans, with such force that the sky split, not in halves, but in truths. The age of Cronus had ended. The Titans would not surrender. The Titans take the field. Mount Othrys trembled as the first of the elder gods descended, not as mortals would, on foot or by chariot, but as forces. Atlas, thunderous and vast, stepped like nightfall incarnate. Menoetius, eyes wild with righteous wrath, bellowed challenges that cracked glaciers. Hyperion, wreathed in celestial fire, brought with him the searing light of dawn turned to fury. And at their center, Cronus, his sickle reforged from stardust and silence, stood still as stone. But there were more. From the sea came Oceanus, conflicted, swirling with tides of doubt and loyalty. From caves and stars, the neutral ones watched, Phoebe, Themis, and Mnemosyne, too tied to lore and memory to intervene. Yet, even Gaia, torn between children, remained silent. For now, the Olympians rise. Zeus was not alone. Beside him stood the 5 freed siblings, now grown and transfigured. Poseidon, trident in hand, his footsteps birthing tidal waves, his voice laced with storm wind. Hades, cloaked in shadow, moving between layers of reality, eyes calm and cold as buried obsidian. Hera, who wore command like a crown and wielded order as a weapon. Demeter, whose fury turned harvests to ash. and made wildflowers bloom where blood fell. Hestia, quiet flame at the center, whispering unity in every gesture, even as war stirred. And around them gathered allies. Prometheus, cunning and careful, foresaw the tides of battle before they began. Themis, at last swayed, chose balance over blood, order over stagnation. And from the abyss, their greatest hope emerged. The release of the forgotten. Deep within Tartarus, Zeus descended. With Gaia's guidance, he unshackled the buried children of Uranus. The Cyclopes, with one eye ablaze like suns trapped in stone, creators of thunder. The Hecatonchires, giants of 100 arms, each one swinging mountains like stones, their roars forming valleys. It was they who reshaped the war. The Cyclopes gifted, Zeus with lightning, Poseidon with the trident, forged in salt and surge, Hades with the helm of invisibility, a shadow that swallowed light and fear alike. The war became not only possible, it became inevitable. The war unfolds. For 10 immortal years, the world shook. Mountains split and reformed. Oceans drained and rose again. Forests burned and regrew in a single breath. The very fabric of time warped beneath the tread of gods. Days were not counted in hours, but in epochs. On the battlefield, Zeus hurled bolt after bolt, his roars echoing through all realms. Cronus met him, stroke for stroke, sickle clashing against the sky, unrelenting. Poseidon turned deserts into seas, swallowing entire Titan hosts. Hyperion countered with flame. Whole rivers boiled as his fury scorched sky and soil. Hades moved through shadows, striking unseen, his helm making him death incarnate. Atlas lifted mountains and hurled them like pebbles until he stood alone, bearing more than just stone. The Hecatonchires, with their many arms, became storms in flesh, their fists raining down meteors. There was no victor, not for a long time. The turning point, it came not from strength, but from will. Zeus, burning, bleeding, sleepless, climbed the highest peak, higher than even Othrys, and summoned the totality of the storm. He reached into the sky, not as a conqueror, but as the child of sky and fate, and the heavens answered. For a moment, the world paused. Clouds spiraled inward, winds ceased, light bent. Then, the final bolt, not of lightning alone, but of choice. He hurled it toward Cronus, not to kill, but to end. It struck with such force that time itself stuttered. The Titans faltered, one by one. They fell. Cronus last, collapsing beneath the weight of an age that could no longer sustain itself. The binding. Zeus did not destroy them. He could not. They were eternal. Instead, he bound them, the defeated Titans, in the very place that had once held their monstrous kin, Tartarus. A prison forged not only of stone, but of memory. Atlas, punished for his pride, was not cast down, but lifted up, cursed to bear the sky itself, a weight so immense it crushed centuries into minutes. The war had ended, but echoes of it still trembled in the earth. And so the world exhaled. The Titans, who once cradled existence in their hands, now lay deep beneath its skin. The Olympians stood atop the shattered remnants of war, not as gods of peace, but as gods who had learned the price of power. The silence after storm. After 10 immortal years of celestial warfare, the cosmos stood bruised but intact. Smoke no longer curled from broken mountaintops. Lightning no longer danced across the sea's skin. The sky, once split by fire and fate, slowly stitched itself closed. And in that silence, a deep, velvety silence that blanketed the heavens, the victors gathered not to celebrate, but to decide. What does one do with beings who cannot die, who shaped the sky before there were stars, who held the seasons in their breath and the rivers in their veins? The Titans were too great to destroy, too ancient to simply forget. They would be buried, but never erased. The descent into Tartarus. In the shadow of Mount Othrys, the earth itself opened, not as a wound, but as a mouth, a gate of black stone, framed by writhing roots and whispers, yawned wide. This was Tartarus, not just a pit, but a realm of containment, a prison for the eternal. One by one, the fallen Titans were cast down. Cronus, once king of all time, was the first. He did not scream. He did not fight. He walked into the chasm with eyes that saw nothing, not past, not future, only the endless now. His sickle, once forged from rebellion, lay abandoned in the dust above. Menoetius, wild with fury to the end, had to be bound with chains forged from the bones of meteors. He struck at the void with curses, but even his fire dimmed in that pit. Iapetus, grim and silent, bowed his head and disappeared. Creus followed, murmuring star maps no one understood, and Hyperion, the bearer of light, left the world darker by his absence. Though even now, some say the sun still remembers his name, the weight of Atlas. But Atlas, boldest and proudest, was not sent to Tartarus. Zeus saw something else in him, strength that would not yield, even in defeat. And so, a different fate was given. He was led to the far edge of the world, beyond ocean, beyond sky, to the place where the heavens met the horizon. There he was commanded to stand and lift, to bear upon his shoulders the sky itself, a vault of stars and air and storm, a weight meant for no being. He did not weep, he did not beg, but when the last footstep of the gods faded from his ears, Atlas tilted his head upward and whispered, "May you hold it better than I." And then he lifted, and has not lowered it since. The survivors. Not all Titans were condemned. Oceanus, who had never taken arms, returned to his eternal rivers, circling the edge of the world like a silver thread in twilight. Themis, goddess of divine law, remained, now a quiet advisor to Olympus, her scales balanced anew. Mnemosyne, mother of memory, wandered between dreams and waking, guarding the stories no one remembered. And Prometheus, foresighted and thoughtful, chose neither side, but lingered near mankind, whom he loved more than the gods. Their time had not yet come, but their shadows lingered, subtle and deep. The rise of Olympus. With the Titans chained and cast into myth, the Olympians ascended. From Mount Olympus, tall and veiled in clouds, they began to shape the new order. Zeus, crowned by storm and decree, ruled not only the skies, but the rhythm of law. His throne crackled with thunder and judgment. Poseidon carved the oceans with his trident, his laughter heard in waves and whirlpools. Hades claimed the unseen realm, the place of endings and echoes, and built a quiet kingdom beneath the roots of the world. Hera, regal and eternal, became queen of Olympus. Her will, a force no lesser god dared test. Demeter stitched life back into the earth, her grief blooming into harvest. And Hestia, calm and ever glowing, kept the sacred flame lit at the center of all things. Yet in their triumph, there was no peace, only balance. The earth remembers. Gaia, the mother of all, did not speak. But she remembered. She remembered the pain of her buried children. She remembered the cost of order and the cycle of overthrow. And deep within Tartarus, where stone dripped like tears and time pooled in corners, the Titans sat, unaging, unbreaking, unmoved. They did not sleep. They did not speak. They simply waited for the turning of the wheel, for the next age, for the world to remember them. Thus ended the age of Titans, not with death, but with descent, not with vengeance, but with chains. And though Olympus now stood bright and high, its foundation trembled softly, for beneath it the first gods still sat, silent, and dreaming the new world. The Olympians stood tall beneath the dawn. Mount Olympus crowned the horizon like a citadel of mist and marble. The air was no longer heavy with fire. The rivers ran clear. The forests grew back, timid at first, then bold with color and bloom. The world had begun again. Zeus, seated on his throne of cloud and judgment, ruled with a hand forged in thunder and a gaze sharpened by prophecy. But he was not his father, and that difference made all the difference. For though he held dominion over sky and fate, he had seen war. He had learned from rebellion. He knew that all things move in cycles. Prometheus and the gift. Among those who had walked both sides of the war, one figure now turned his gaze not to gods, but to mortals. Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, wandered the new earth, quiet and thoughtful. He did not crave Olympus. He did not mourn Othrys. He watched the first flickers of mankind, fragile, curious, unfinished. They had no fire, no tools, no knowledge, and so he gave them flame. Not just the flame that warms the hands and cooks the meat, but the flame of thought, of invention, of disobedience. From Olympus, Zeus watched this with unease. The gift was too bold, too early, too powerful. Prometheus was punished, chained to a crag in the Caucasus, his liver devoured daily by an eagle spawned from divine wrath. Yet he did not scream, he only watched the horizon, for he knew that the gift would burn longer than the chain would hold, the memory of giants. Though the Titans were sealed in Tartarus, their presence never truly left. In the deep rumble of earthquakes, the Hecatoncheires shifted in their sleep. In the lone eye of the hurricane, the Cyclops blinked. In the stillness between thunderclaps, Cronus remembered a time when he held the world in his hands. And mankind remembered too, not in words, but in stories. They spoke of giants who shaped mountains with their hands, beings who drank starlight and held the sun on their shoulders, a golden age when gods walked among trees and spoke to rivers. These were not just myths. They were echoes, memories encoded in the bones of the world. Even now, some say that when the wind moves just right through the hollows of forgotten caves, you can hear a Titan breathe. The cycle continues. Time did not end with Olympus. It did not freeze with the Titans' fall. There would be new gods, new struggles, new rebellions. A girl named Persephone would walk into the underworld and rise changed. A mortal named Heracles would shatter chains meant for immortals. And the fire Prometheus gave would kindle cities, spark ideas, topple empires. Yet through it all, one truth whispered beneath the surface. Every age is built upon the bones of the last, and every king is a son, every ruler a future relic. For even gods are bound by time. In the end, the Titans, though fallen, endure, not in shrines, not in worship, but in the architecture of the cosmos. They are the curve of the horizon, the rhythm of the tides, the weight of ancient mountains that do not bow. They are the silence before thunder, the breath before change. They are the first chapter of every story, even the ones yet unwritten. And so, the tale ends where it began, in silence. Not of absence, but of mystery. The Titans sleep beneath our feet, the Olympians reign above, and we live between their dreams. Listen closely, wanderer. The echoes are still there, always.